2 Kings, and we'll be reading from chapter 8. Second Kings, chapter 8, and we'll be starting in verse 1. Then spake Elisha unto the woman, whose son he had restored to life, saying, Arise and go, thou and thine household, and sojourn wheresoever thou canst sojourn. For the Lord hath called for a famine, and it shall also come upon the land 7 years. And the woman arose and did after the saying of the man of God. And she went with her household, and sojourned in the land of the Philistines 7 years. And it came to pass at the 7 years' end, that the woman returned out of the land of the Philistines. And she went forth to cry unto the king for her house and for her land. And the king talked with Gehazi the servant of the man of God, saying, Tell me, I pray thee, all the great things that Elisha hath done. And it came to pass, as he was telling the king how he had restored a dead body to life, that behold, the woman whose son he had restored to life cried to the king for her house and for her land. And Gehazi said, My lord, O king, this is the woman, and this is her son, whom Elisha restored to life. And when the king asked the woman, she told him. So the king appointed unto her a certain officer, saying, Restore all that was hers, and all the fruits of the field since the day that she left the land, even until now. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. God, help me, anoint me with your Spirit, and preach through me, not me and my flesh, so that you can put forward to these people, your church, what you want them to hear, not what I want them to hear, but what you have shown me tonight, and what I will show, what you through me will show to them tonight. Amen. So here, we all know, well, we should know the story if we read the Bible. It is about Elisha and this woman. She was a rich woman of the town of Shunem, that when Elisha was passing through from time to time, she made him a room in her house, and she got her husband to fix up the room, make it all nice for him so that he could have it as a set of apartments to stay in every time he's passing through that area. Because the preachers back then and the prophets, they had to go in circuits. There wasn't enough to just have one in every city like we have now, but they had to go in circuits throughout the land of Israel. And this woman, we see Elisha spoke to her after and says, there will be a famine in the land, and you will have to go to the land of the Philistines. And she didn't ask any questions. At this time, since the first time they had stepped foot into the land, the Philistines had been their greatest enemy. And now she was supposed to go. An Israelite, a God-fearing Israelite, was told by God to go to the land of the enemy and to live there. And just imagine the turmoil. She was a wealthier woman in that city, had to leave all the comforts, all of that, to go into a strange land, an enemy's land, and live there for 7 whole years. Just imagine that. For us, it would be like going to the Middle East or some place that is violent against the Western people, as they were back then. And God tells you, go live there for 7 years. Would you do it? Would you do it without a question? Would you just pack up your household and go right away? But she did, and she went there. And then after the 7 years had been fulfilled, she said, now is my time when I can finally come back to Israel. And so she did. And just thinking about this timing, it's perfect. The king here is asking Gehazi, which was Elisha's personal servant, to relate to him all the stories of Elisha's miracles. He just maybe wanted to be entertained, maybe wanted to hear more about what God was working in his country. And he said to the servant, tell me what Elisha has done. So as Gehazi is telling him the story after story after story of his healings, of his dealings with all the Syrian army, and with all the famines that were going on, how he was helping them. And as he's relating all these miracles, one after the other, he gets to this miracle where this woman, her son was toiling in the fields with her husband, and then he suddenly fell ill. And after that, he died. But after that, Elisha told her, don't worry, and God raised him up. And he's just relating this story to him, and then imagine the woman comes in just at that right time. As soon as he's just finished telling the story, he's like, that is the woman, that is her son. And just that timing that God has for these things. And it worked out for the woman as she followed God. She followed him perfectly till the 7 years were fulfilled, and God took care of her. She might have thought halfway through, or even less, what am I doing here? Why am I doing here? It is so bad here for me. I'm looked down upon. But she persevered those 7 years, and she came back exactly at the time God told her to, and God took care of her. And even if you look at verse 6, the king said, restore all the fruits of her field for the time that she was gone. Not only did she get what she asked for, but she got above and beyond. And that is how God is. If you listen to him, if you obey his perfect timing, he will go above and beyond to take care of you. And if you just hold your place in 2 Kings, as we're going to be turning back here a couple times, and turn over forward to Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 3. And we'll be starting in verse 5. Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. There's so much wisdom crammed into just these 2 verses that Solomon was trying to teach to his son. And you read through this, how he's teaching his son step after step. And in this, trust in the Lord with all thine heart. You have to do it with all your heart. I know it's hard. For me, it's hard. And as Paul said, we have to crucify ourselves daily. It's not just, I surrender all, and it's all hunky-dory from then on. No, it doesn't work that way. I wish it did. It would be so much easier. But it's a daily fight, a fight minute by minute. A battle isn't won by just going in and fighting one battle and that's it. No, it's a grueling battle. You look at World War I, World War II, it was many, many years of constant fighting, constant killing, constant attacks, constant defeats, until somebody emerges a victor. And that is how our life is. We battle with the spiritual forces of darkness, and we battle with them until we're taken up to heaven. And so we have to trust the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. That's a hard thing to do, because we as humans want to use human wisdom. We want to apply human wisdom to things. We want to be able to understand something before we do it. Sometimes, like me, I want to comprehend exactly what I'm going to do, exactly what's going to happen when I do this, and then I'm happy doing it. But God says, no, that's not how I want you to do it sometimes. Sometimes he tells us, do this, and he doesn't tell us why. He doesn't tell us what's going to happen at the end, but we just have to do it with our own heart, with all our heart. And in all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. So she acknowledged him in all her ways. She set the prophet of God, she put him in her life, and she kept him in her life, and God took care of her. She didn't say, you could stay here for a bit and then you go on your way. No, she said, come back as often as you can. I want to be with you. She wanted to be with God, because the prophets at the time were the messengers of God to the people. It was the closest they could get to God at that time, was through those prophets. And she wanted to be as close to God as she could. And he directed her paths. She acknowledged him with everything that she had. She set apart all that she could for the prophet. and God took care of her. And then if we go back to Psalm chapter 31, Psalm 31. Psalm 31, and we'll start in verse 14. But I trusted in thee, O Lord. I said, thou art my God. My times are in thy hand. Deliver me from the hand of mine enemies, and from them that persecute me. So here we see Solomon's father, David, and we see how much Solomon echoed his father. His father here writes, but I trusted in thee, O Lord. I said, thou art my God. He didn't follow all the false gods of that time, but he said, you are my God, and I will follow you through thick and through thin, as we see. Sometimes it wasn't the best for him. He was chased all over Israel. He was chased into the land of the Philistines, chased into, it seems like, every part of Israel you could imagine. But he followed God, and he daily followed God. And every time he did do something, mess up on something, we see he repented shortly after. And that is the way our life should be. We will mess up, that's a fact, as we are a fallen man, but we need to repent right after and keep following God with all our heart. And as we notice parts of our heart starting to come back to ourselves, we need to give them back to God and say, sorry God, as I've been stealing what is yours. Because the moment we said, I am yours, God, I will follow you, I trust you with my life, the moment you said that, you gave him yourself. And taking any part of that back is stealing from God. We have sacrificed ourselves as a living sacrifice, and a sacrifice does not jump off the altar. We might try to crawl off the altar because the crucified man, he still tries to come back and claw back whatever he can grab, but we need to crucify it daily, and we need to keep ourselves on the altar. We need to keep ourselves on the altar for God, and then God will deliver us. And my times are in thy hand. That we say, let me just set apart this short bit of time for myself, and that doesn't work out. You start with that little time, and then you get distracted by another thing, you get distracted by another thing. But we are to be focusing on God fully. And just over a few Psalms to Psalm 40. And verse 1. I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined unto me and heard my cry. Sometimes we are asking for God's purpose in our life, and we want it in our timing. But that is already saying, God, I'm in control of my life. I want this, and this is how I want it. But no, we have to wait patiently for his timing, because once we have sacrificed ourselves to him, we are under his authority, under his control. And if we turn back to 2 Kings, and this time we'll go to chapter 19. 2 Kings 19. And starting in verse 10. Thus shall ye speak to Hezekiah king of Judah, saying, Let not thy God in whom thou trustest deceive thee, saying, Jerusalem shall not be delivered into the hand of the king of Assyria. Behold, thou hast heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all lands, by destroying them utterly, and shalt thou be delivered? Have the gods of the nations delivered them which my fathers have destroyed, as Gozan and Haran and Rezeph, and the children of Eden which are in Thelasar? Where is the king of Hamath, and the king of Arpad, and the king of the city of Sepharvaim, of Hena and Ivan? Here the city of Jerusalem, under the command of Hezekiah now, is surrounded by the king of Assyria, and he is taunting him. He is telling him, here's a list of all the nations that have disappeared off the face of the earth because of me. And he's saying, many of these nations were stronger than you. They were bigger than you. and yet they exist no more. Where are these nations? Where are these kings? And what does Hezekiah do? We pick up in verse 14. And Hezekiah received the letter of the hand of the messengers and read it. And Hezekiah went up into the house of the Lord and spread it before the Lord. And Hezekiah prayed before the Lord and said, O Lord God of Israel, which dwellest between the cherubims, thou art the God, even thou alone. Of all the kingdoms of the earth, thou hast made heaven and earth. Lord, bow down thine ear and hear. Open, Lord, thine eyes and see, and hear the words of Sennacherib, which hath sent him to reproach the living God. Of a truth, Lord, the kings of Assyria have destroyed the nations and their land, and have cast their gods into the fire. For they were no gods, but the work of man's hands, wood and stone. Therefore they have destroyed them. Now therefore, O Lord our God, I beseech thee, save thou us out of his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that thou art the Lord God, even thou only. Here we see Hezekiah's petition to God. We see Hezekiah's soul being poured out to God as he sees his whole livelihood, his whole nation could be crumbled into dust like all the nations before. The Assyrians went to nation after nation after nation after nation, taking them down to the ground till there was just dust and maybe a few stones left around. They totally annihilated many, many nations, and now the Israelites were next. But Hezekiah said, you are the only God. Those gods couldn't help them. But you are God. We know that you can help us. And here he is appealing to God and saying, I trust you, and I know you are the true God. And as the true God, you can save me from this. He delivered everything to God. He didn't say, okay, send out this army and that army and that army before he went to God. No, he went straight to God. He had trusted him with his whole heart. He knew that the city was already starving to death. People were probably starting to eat each other alive. And he went straight to God. He didn't resort to any other thing. Being the king, he probably had power to try a few things. But no, he went straight to God, and straight to God first and only. And what happened because of that? Well, we see in verse 20. Then Isaiah the son of Amos sent to Hezekiah, saying, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, that which thou hast prayed to me against Sennacherib, king of Assyria, I have heard. So here we see God tells him, I have heard your cry, and I will listen. And we skip over to verse 35. And it came to pass that night that the angel of the Lord went out and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 180,500. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed, and went and returned and dwelt at Nineveh. So God heard and God acted, because Hezekiah put his trust in the Lord. He put his trust fully in the Lord, and he acknowledged him in all his ways. We see all the reforms of Hezekiah, how he was digging through the temple, trying to find the law of God, that he might follow it. He wrote many psalms even, glorifying God. And we see how he had devoted his whole life to serving God. And he accepted God's timing. God could have said, wait a week. God could have said, wait 2 weeks. But Hezekiah knew that God had heard his cry and God would do something. And here we are with our life. We're saying, God, I want you to do this now. But no, we are God's now, and we should be waiting for his timing. Like with the building right now, I know many of us, I am anxious to have a building put up, to have something, some place we can call our home, where we can sing out loud at night without upsetting anybody above us, where we can carry out God's work, but God says it's not time. And we must just sit patiently and wait and say, okay, God, I will trust in you, and I will wait. And that is the way we must be with all the aspects of our life. We aren't to use our own understanding. We're not supposed to try to figure things out first, and then if that fails, then we go to God. No, we should go to God first and foremost and only. And because He is the one that can truly fix our problems. And His time is the perfect time. And He will give above and beyond even what you wanted in the beginning. If we turn, I didn't write this one down here, but it should be here. Got back to chapter 13. Chapter 13 and verse 14. Now Elisha was fallen sick of a sickness whereof he died. And Joash the king of Israel came down unto him, and wept over his face, and said, O my father, the chariot of Israel, and the horsemen thereof. Now Joash was an evil king, if we look in back to verse 11, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. He departed not from all the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who made Israel sin, but he walked therein. We see that Joash was an evil king, but he recognized that Elisha was one of the reasons and one of the ways that God had been keeping Israel alive. And Elisha said unto him in verse 15, Take bow and arrows. And he took unto him bow and arrows. And he said to the king of Israel, Put thine hand upon the bow. And he put his hand upon it. And Elisha put his hands upon the king's hands. And he said, Open the window eastward. And he opened it. Then Elisha said, Shoot. And he shot. And he said, The arrow of the Lord's deliverance, and the arrow of deliverance from Syria. For thou shalt smite the Syrians in Aphek, till thou have consumed them. So we see here that this ungodly king is with Elisha in his last days. And we see that Elisha is telling him these things to do. And so far we see that he is obeying them faithfully. But then he says in verse 18, And he said, Take the arrows, and he took them. And he said unto the king of Israel, Smite upon the ground, and he smote thrice and stayed. And that is one of the most tragic verses in all of the history of Israel. He smote thrice and stayed. Back we see the context in verse 17, the arrow of the Lord's deliverance, and the arrow of deliverance from Syria. For thou shalt smite the Syrians in Aphek, till thou have consumed them. So we see the arrows have importance, and the king should have seen that these arrows have importance and were a symbol of what he was going to do with Syria. And he said, With these you shall smite Syria. With these you shall destroy Syria. And he says, Now smite the ground with the arrows. He should have clued in and smote the ground till he was tired. But no, he smote thrice and he stayed. And sometimes when God tells us to do things, we follow them faithfully, but eventually we just get lazy and just do things half-heartedly. He probably just barely smoked the ground 3 times. And he says, Is this enough? Can I go now? I have other things to do. I don't want to be with this prophet of the Lord anymore. And that is where the kingdom took a turn onto a different road than God had in the blessed road planned for them already. But he smote only thrice. And in verse 19, And the man of God was wroth with him, and said, Thou shouldst have smitten 5 or 6 times. Then hadst thou smitten Syria till thou hadst consumed it. Whereas now thou shalt only smite Syria but thrice. And Elisha died. He could have destroyed Syria. At the time, Syria was one of their greatest threats. And he knew that the arrows were a symbol of smiting Syria, as we read in 17. But he only smote the ground half-heartedly. And that is the way sometimes when God tells us to do things. Yes, we obey, but we don't obey fully. Yes, we obey, but we don't put our whole heart into it. When God's timing does come sometimes, He opens all the doors for us. And we say, sorry God, I'm busy with this. Sorry God, I'm busy with that. God has everything lined up for us. He has that blessed path open wide open, no obstacles in the way. He could have had done it over with Syria, and they would have expanded into Syria, not have to worry about them. But no, He did it half-heartedly. And when God's timing did come, He passed it up, and Israel would suffer for the next many years. King after king would be destroyed by Syria. Town after town was slowly taken from them till they were in a weakened state. And that is why we must trust God wholeheartedly. We must obey God wholeheartedly. And we must follow Him, and follow Him with vigor. We must follow Him with zeal. We must follow Him with our whole heart. We must put our passion into it. Everything that we have, we must put into following God. Otherwise, God sees our half-heartedness and doesn't bless His work.